I want you to place yourself in a very specific room. The year is 1903.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. It's autumn in New York City, and you are standing in this luxurious wood-paneled suite at the Waldorf-Astoria Hotel.
Very fancy.
Exactly. And sitting at a writing desk is a French engineer. Now, this man hasn't stepped foot in Central America for, like, nearly 2 decades.
Oh, wow. So he's completely removed from the ground reality.
Entirely removed. Yet right now, he is casually writing out a personal check for $100,000 to fund a revolution.
That's just an astronomical amount of money back then.
It really is. And he's handing over a handmade silk flag. He is drafting a constitution. He is quite literally mapping out the architecture of a brand new country from a hotel room thousands of miles away.
It's just the ultimate geopolitical staging ground, isn't it? A private citizen bankrolling the birth of a republic, basically utilizing a New York hotel as his own personal war room.
Yeah, it sounds like fiction. But welcome to a new deep dive. Today we are plunging headfirst into a historical political thriller.
A very real one.
Right. Our focus today is the year 1903 and the sudden, dramatic creation of the Republic of Panama. We are asking one towering question today, which is, did Panama truly win its independence? Or was a nation bought, paid for, and engineered by foreign powers?
And to dismantle that question, we are working through a massive, highly detailed historical research dossier.
We've got a lot to get through.
We do. We're looking at centuries of Panamanian history, the shifting tectonic plates of U.S. foreign policy at the dawn of the 20th century, and, pulling directly from primary documents.
Like the treaty itself, right?
Exactly. The Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty, along with the historical records housed at the Theodore Roosevelt Center. We're really getting into the primary sources here.
Which is great. So our mission today is to unravel the intense lobbying, the shadow diplomacy, and the deployment of naval warships that quite literally carved out a nation on the world map.
But we have to do this while strictly anchoring ourselves to the realities on the ground. We have to examine the heavy generational cost this maneuvering imposed on the Panamanian people, because, the paperwork might have been filed in Washington.
But the reality was lived on the isthmus.
Exactly. The legal architecture established in 1903 didn't just facilitate a canal. It basically bisected a country and set the stage for 70 years of diplomatic and social friction.
Okay, let's unpack this, because you don't have a French engineer funding a revolution in a New York hotel suite without some massive global incentives driving the action, right?
Oh, absolutely not. There are huge stakes here.
So to understand why that check was written, we have to look at the strategic obsession of the United States at the turn of the century, and specifically the absolute fixation of President Theodore Roosevelt.
Right, and the catalyst for that obsession, it really can be traced directly back to the Spanish-American War in 1898.
Okay, how so?
Well, that conflict marked the undeniable arrival of the United States as a two-ocean global power, right? Suddenly, they have territory stretching from the Caribbean all the way to the Philippines.
Right, a massive expansion.
But that new status exposed a terrifying logistical vulnerability. And that vulnerability was perfectly encapsulated by the voyage of a single battleship, which was the USS Oregon.
Ah, the Oregon. The journey of the Oregon is really the inciting incident for the entire canal era, isn't it?
It completely is.
So when the war broke out, the Oregon was stationed on the Pacific coast up in Washington state.
Right.
And the U.S. Navy desperately needed her firepower in the Caribbean near Cuba to confront the Spanish fleet. But geography dictated a pretty brutal reality. There was just no shortcut.
No shortcut at all. So the battleship had to embark on a 14,000-mile journey.
14,000 miles.
Yeah. She steamed down the entire western coast of North America, navigated the immense coastline of South America, braved the treacherous freezing storms around Cape Horn at the very bottom.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Extremely. And then she steamed all the way back up through the Atlantic. The voyage took over 60 days.
2 whole months.
Right. And in modern warfare, a 2-month transit time for a capital ship is a fatal strategic delay. The war could literally be over by the time your ship arrives.
Exactly. And for Theodore Roosevelt, who, he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy before ascending to the presidency. So for him, those 60 days were a total revelation.
He was furious about it.
Yeah, he was a devout disciple of the naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan, who argued that global supremacy relied on sea power. Roosevelt realized that a two-ocean navy is functionally useless if it takes a quarter of a year to consolidate your fleet.
It just doesn't work.
Right. So the lesson he extracted from the Oregon was non-negotiable. The United States required a transoceanic canal. It wasn't merely an economic venture to, expedite shipping. It was the absolute linchpin of American national security and imperial defense.
And to be fair, Washington was unified on the necessity of canal. Everyone agreed they needed one. The intense fractured debate was over the location.
Because Panama wasn't the first choice, was it?
No, not at all. The U.S. Congress initially leaned heavily toward building the canal in Nicaragua.
Wait, Nicaragua, why there?
Well, the Walker Commission, which was a U.S. government investigative body, actually recommended the Nicaraguan route in 1901. It seemed more viable to them, the elevation was lower, and they could utilize the massive Lake Nicaragua to traverse a significant portion of the country.
So they wouldn't have to dig as much.
Exactly. It minimized the sheer volume of excavation required.
But Panama had a very motivated, highly desperate advocate fighting against the Nicaragua plan. And this introduces us to the man in the Waldorf-Astoria, right? Philippe Bunau-Varilla.
Bunau-Varilla is just a staggering historical figure. He was deeply, deeply intertwined with the catastrophic French attempt to build a sea-level canal in Panama during the 1880s.
This was under Ferdinand de Lesseps, the guy who built the Suez Canal.
That's the one. And that French endeavor, operating under the company Nouvelle du Canal de Panama, was an unmitigated disaster.
Just a total failure.
Yeah, they were defeated by the rugged topography, the torrential rains, and primarily by mosquito-borne diseases. Yellow fever and malaria just decimated the workforce. They claimed over 20,000 lives.
20,000? That's horrifying.
It's incredibly tragic. And the engineering just proved impossible for a sea-level design in that terrain. So the company completely collapsed, wiping out the life savings of hundreds of thousands of French investors in a massive financial scandal.
So the human toll was horrific, and the financial ruin was absolute. But Bunau-Varilla and the remaining French stakeholders of the reorganized company Nouvelle, they were sitting on the remnants, right?
Right.
They held the legal rights to the route, they had highly detailed geographical maps, the rights to the Panama Railroad, and miles of rusting excavation equipment just abandoned in the jungle.
And they desperately wanted to liquidate these assets to the United States. They put a price tag of $40 million on it.
$40 million. But here's the catch. If the U.S. Congress voted to build in Nicaragua, those Panamanian assets became utterly worthless overnight, like $0.
Exactly zero. So faced with the total vaporization of that $40 million payout, Bunau-Varilla relocated to Washington and launched this incredibly aggressive, highly sophisticated lobbying campaign.
He had his work cut out for him.
He had to single-handedly flip the U.S. Senate from Nicaragua to Panama. And he executed this by exploiting a specific geographical vulnerability, which was seismic activity.
I love this part. He literally weaponized geology.
He absolutely did. So the debate in Congress was already touching on the engineering risks of a canal. And right at this critical juncture, in the spring of 1902, Mount Pelée, which is a volcano on the Caribbean island of Martinique, erupted catastrophically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it killed roughly 30,000 people. The global public was horrified, and the sheer destructive power of volcanic activity just dominated the news cycle.
And Bunau-Varilla sees this and thinks, how can I use this?
Right, because he knew that Nicaragua, unlike Panama, was heavily dotted with active volcanoes. In fact, Momotombo, a volcano located right on the shores of Lake Nicaragua.
Wait, the exact lake the U.S. planned to use for their canal?
The very same lake. Momotombo had recently experienced activity.
So Bunau-Varilla leans hard into this fear. He discovers that the Nicaraguan government had recently issued a postage stamp that proudly depicted Momotombo erupting in all its glory.
Yeah, it was intended to showcase the majestic landscape of the country.
But Bunau-Varilla immediately recognizes the psychological leverage this tiny piece of paper holds.
Oh, it's brilliant. He systematically buys up every single one of these stamps he can find from dealers in Washington and New York. He pastes each stamp onto a sheet of paper and mails one to every single U.S. senator.
Every single one.
Yeah, and he includes a brief, pointed note that effectively asks, is this the environment where you want to invest hundreds of millions of American taxpayer dollars?
It is a masterstroke of visual persuasion. I mean, he isn't presenting complex geological surveys or boring engineering reports. He's handing them an official government document from Nicaragua proving that the country is literally explosive.
And the strategy was wildly successful. The Senate debate shifted dramatically. The fear of an eruption destroying the canal infrastructure just spooked the legislators.
I mean, you can't blame them, really.
No, it's a terrifying prospect.
Mhm.
So in June 1902, Congress passed the Spooner Act, which officially reversed their position and authorized President Roosevelt to purchase the French company's assets and build the canal in Panama.
But there was a catch, right?
A big one. They could only do it provided he could secure a treaty with the sovereign government controlling the territory.
Right. And that requirement introduces the central geopolitical roadblock of this entire narrative, because Panama was not an independent nation.
No, it was a department, essentially a province of the Republic of Colombia.
So, to build the canal, the United States had to acquire the land rights directly from the government in Bogota.
And the initial diplomatic efforts appeared successful. In January of 1903, the U.S. Secretary of State, John Hay, and the Colombian Chargé d'Affaires, Tomás Herrán, signed the Hay-Herran Treaty.
Okay, and what were the terms of that?
This agreement would have granted the United States a 100-year lease on a 6-mile-wide strip of land across the Isthmus of Panama. In exchange, Colombia would receive an upfront payment of $10 million, plus an annual annuity of $250,000.
Sounds like a deal. Roosevelt probably viewed the matter as totally settled.
He absolutely did. But Roosevelt vastly underestimated the political climate in Colombia. In August of 1903, the Colombian Senate convened to ratify the treaty, and they overwhelmingly rejected it.
Wait, rejected it? Like, asked for a better deal?
No, they didn't just ask for revisions, they voted it down entirely.
Oh, wow.
The Colombian rejection was rooted in deep, complex internal politics and a fierce defense of their national sovereignty. The Colombian Constitution explicitly prohibited the permanent alienation of national territory.
But you said it was a 100-year lease, right?
Technically, yes. But the terms granted the U.S. overwhelming jurisdictional control, which the Colombian senators correctly interpreted as a de facto surrender of sovereignty over the isthmus. They weren't fooled by the word lease.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, Colombia had just emerged from the devastating Thousand Days' War. It was a brutal civil conflict that had bankrupted the country. So they looked at the $10 million offered by the U.S. and realized it was a fraction of the land's true strategic value.
Especially since the French company was getting, what, $40 million?
Exactly. They knew the French company was about to receive $40 million for the equipment and rights, and the Colombian Senate felt they, as the sovereign owners of the land, were entitled to a portion of that French buyout.
Okay, let me frame Roosevelt's reaction for you as the listener. Imagine trying to buy a strip of land in your neighbor's massive backyard. You agree on a price with the husband, but the wife says absolutely not.
Right.
Instead of walking away, you secretly fund the kids in the backyard to declare their own household so you can buy the land from them instead.
That is a remarkably accurate analogy.
So Bogota guards its sovereignty and holds out for equitable financial terms. But Theodore Roosevelt's reaction to this diplomatic refusal is famously explosive, isn't it?
He was completely enraged. He doesn't respect their legislative process at all. He views their assertion of sovereignty not as a legal right, but as an intolerable obstruction of American destiny.
Yeah, he privately denigrates the Colombian government, calling them contemptible little creatures and jackrabbits. I mean, he is absolutely furious that a weaker nation is blocking his grand strategic vision.
And this creates an incredibly volatile diplomatic deadlock by the late summer of 1903. Roosevelt just refuses to renegotiate the financial terms with Colombia. He actually considers taking the isthmus by military force, but he knows a naked imperial invasion would be politically disastrous, both domestically and internationally.
And meanwhile, the clock is ticking on the French company's charter, right?
If they don't finalize the sale soon, they lose their $40 million.
So with the Colombian Senate stonewalling the treaty, Theodore Roosevelt's diplomatic avenues were officially exhausted. But the canal still needed to be built. That diplomatic dead end in Bogota created a vacuum, and Philippe Bunau-Varilla, facing total financial ruin, was more than willing to fill it.
Exactly. Bunau-Varilla recognized that the U.S. government could not legally circumvent Colombia. But an independent Panama could.
And this brings us right back to that suite at the Waldorf-Astoria. Bunau-Varilla needs a revolution, but he can't exactly fight it himself. He needs local actors.
Right. He needs people on the ground.
So he identifies a long-simmering resentment toward Bogota among the Panamanian elite. Panama had a history of feeling neglected and exploited by the central government, and there was already a clandestine independence movement taking shape.
Yes, and it was led by a prominent physician and railroad official named Manuel Amador.
Amador Guerrero. He is a crucial, complicated figure in this narrative.
Very complicated. He represented the Panamanian commercial class who desperately wanted the canal built. They knew that if the U.S. abandoned Panama for Nicaragua, the isthmus would plunge into profound economic irrelevance.
So they needed this just as much as Bunau-Varilla did.
In a way, yes. Amador wanted independence and the economic boom of the canal. But an armed rebellion against the battle-hardened Colombian army, that was a suicide mission without external support.
Right, you can't just declare independence and expect them to say, okay, cool.
Exactly. Amador needed modern weapons, significant capital to bribe local garrisons, and most importantly, a guarantee that the powerful Colombian military wouldn't simply march down the isthmus and execute the conspirators for treason.
So, seeking this support, Amador travels to New York in the fall of 1903, hoping to secure direct backing from the U.S. government. But instead of official meetings at the State Department, he finds himself redirected to room 1162 of the Waldorf-Astoria, sitting across from Philippe Bunau-Varilla.
And you have to understand, Bunau-Varilla had been incredibly active in Washington. While acting as a private citizen, he had engaged in highly sensitive, off-the-record meetings with President Roosevelt and Secretary of State John Hay.
Just casual chats.
Right. And while there is no written record of a direct, explicit conspiracy, the subtle diplomatic signaling was very clear. Bunau-Varilla deduced exactly how the U.S. would react if a revolution occurred. He understood the legal mechanisms the U.S. could exploit to intervene.
So Bunau-Varilla basically assumes the role of the shadow broker. He looks at Amador and essentially says, I will be your financier and your guarantor. He writes the $100,000 personal check to fund the bribes and logistics. He provides a military strategy.
He even hands over a drafted Declaration of Independence and a rudimentary constitution.
And the flag. He provides the physical symbol of the new nation, a silk flag hastily sewn by his own wife, Madame Bunau-Varilla, right there in New York. I mean, he hands Amador a nation in a box.
What's fascinating here is that this patronage came with an absolute non-negotiable condition. Bunau-Varilla demanded that upon the successful Declaration of Independence, the new Republic of Panama must appoint him a French citizen as their official envoy to the United States.
Wait, so he gets to negotiate the treaty?
Exactly, granting him the absolute authority to negotiate the new Canal Treaty on their behalf.
Okay, let's analyze the power dynamics of that hotel room. When we look at this through a modern lens, it's tempting to view Manuel Amador as a helpless pawn, right? Just a local doctor manipulated by a sophisticated European corporate agent.
Sure, it looks that way on the surface.
But if we look closer at the mechanics of this deal, was Amador really just a passive victim? Or was he engaging in a highly calculated, incredibly dangerous game of 3D chess? Maybe he knew he was being used, but decided to use Bunau-Varilla's money and American muscle to achieve a long-held Panamanian dream of independence.
I think it is entirely inaccurate to view the Panamanian conspirators as naive pawns. Amador and his associates were experienced political operators. They had survived decades of Colombian civil wars. They were acutely aware of Bunau-Varilla's true motivations.
They knew he just wanted his $40 million.
Exactly. They knew the Frenchman didn't care about Panamanian liberty. But Amador also knew that earlier Panamanian uprisings in the 19th century had been brutally crushed because they lacked international protection.
So he made a choice. It's as if a marginalized minority shareholder utilizes a hostile foreign conglomerate to launch a proxy war, knowing full well the conglomerate intends to strip the company's main asset. Amador knew he was making a perilous bargain.
He was trading a massive degree of future sovereignty for immediate survival.
Right. He wagered that securing independence, even heavily compromised independence under the umbrella of American imperialism, was vastly preferable to remaining a neglected province of Colombia, or, facing execution if the plot failed. He took the check, he took the flag, and he sailed back to the isthmus to light the fuse.
And with the financing secured and the political theater choreographed in New York, the revolution transitioned from a paper conspiracy to a volatile military reality on the ground. Amador returned to Panama and set the date for early November 1903.
But a revolution against the Colombian army requires a very big bodyguard. You can't just bribe your way out of a battalion.
No, you cannot. You need a physical barrier to stop the inevitable counterattack.
And that physical barrier arrives on November 2nd, 1903. The United States dispatches a heavily armed naval warship, the USS Nashville, under the command of John Hubbard, to drop anchor directly off the coast of Colon, which is the Panamanian city on the Caribbean side of the isthmus.
The presence of the Nashville is the absolute turning point of the entire saga. because the very next day, November 3rd, the Panamanian conspirators launched their revolt in Panama City on the Pacific side. They declare independence and establish a provisional junta.
But the Colombian government in Bogotá isn't blind. They catch wind of the unrest and immediately deploy a battalion of elite troops, the Tiradores Battalion, to crush the rebellion.
Right.
The troops land in Colón, exactly where the USS Nashville is anchored. Normally, these troops would simply board the Panama Railroad, travel the 47 miles across the isthmus, and arrest Amador and his allies in Panama City within a few hours.
But the Panamanian rebels had already bribed the key Colombian military officers in Panama City, and they had the full cooperation of the American officials running the Panama Railroad.
So when the troops show up to get on the train,
The railroad superintendent simply refused to transport them, citing a sudden, mysterious lack of available train cars.
oh, how convenient. And when the Colombian commander demands action, the American military power steps in. Commander Hubbard of the Nashville lands Marines in Colón. They physically interpose themselves between the Colombian troops and the railroad. They issue a direct order. No armed forces will be permitted to cross the isthmus.
And what is truly remarkable here is the legal gymnastics the United States utilized to justify this blockade. Commander Hubbard didn't claim he was supporting a revolution. He claimed he was enforcing international law.
Right, he invoked a treaty.
Yes, the United States invoked the Mallarino-Bidlack Treaty of 1846.
Okay, let's define the mechanics of that treaty, because this is where the history gets incredibly cynical. The Mallarino-Bidlack Treaty was an agreement signed decades earlier between the U.S. and Colombia. Article 35 of that treaty guaranteed the United States the right of free transit across the Isthmus of Panama.
Correct.
So, if a civil war or riot threatened to shut down the railroad, the U.S. had the right to intervene to keep the trains running.
But, and this is the crucial part, that right of transit was granted in exchange for a massive, explicit guarantee. In that exact same treaty, the United States solemnly guaranteed to protect, and I quote, the rights of sovereignty and property which New Granada, which was Colombia, has and possesses over the said territory.
So the treaty was explicitly designed to protect Colombian sovereignty.
Yes, to defend Colombian ownership of Panama against foreign powers like Britain.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like hiring a security guard to protect your store. And when your employee's trying to unionize and kick you out, the security guard locks the doors and says he's just keeping the peace.
That's exactly it.
The United States takes a treaty specifically designed to protect Colombia's sovereign ownership of the land, and they twist the wording to effectively steal the land. The U.S. argues that the mere presence of Colombian troops trying to cross their own territory to put down a rebellion would cause fighting.
Which would disrupt the free transit of the railroad.
Right. Therefore, to protect transit, the U.S. must prevent Colombia from defending its own sovereignty.
It is a breathtaking distortion of international law. They weaponized a defense pact to facilitate a secession. They paralyzed the Colombian military apparatus without declaring war.
And for the government in Bogotá, this was a profound trauma. I mean, they weren't defeated in a massive military campaign. They were legally and physically boxed out of their own territory by an imperial power playing word games.
Yeah, they lost their most valuable geographical asset, an asset that would generate billions of dollars in the coming century. And they lost it because an American warship locked the doors to the isthmus.
It generated a burning national humiliation and a deeply held grievance that defined U.S.-Colombian relations for decades.
But on the ground in Panama, the American legal fiction worked perfectly. Because the Colombian troops were trapped in Colón and eventually forced to sail back to Cartagena, the revolution succeeded. It was incredibly swift and largely bloodless.
Though it wasn't completely bloodless, right?
No, the historical record notes that a Colombian gunboat in the Bay of Panama did fire shells into Panama City in frustration, tragically killing a civilian shopkeeper and a small number of others.
But strategically, within a matter of days, the geopolitical landscape was completely rewritten. The revolt happens on November 3rd. By November 6th, the United States grants de facto recognition to the new Republic of Panama. By November 13th, formal diplomatic recognition is established. The nation of Panama is officially born.
They have their territory, their flag, and their junta. But the debt for the Waldorf-Astoria check and the protection of the USS Nashville is immediately called in.
The bill comes due.
Yes, and the tragedy for the Panamanian people is that this debt is collected, and the future of their nation is signed away before their true representatives even have a chance to read the terms.
Because while the Panamanians are celebrating their survival in Panama City, Philippe Bunau-Varilla is in Washington, D.C., executing the final, most devastating phase of his plan.
Right. Based on the absolute condition he established in New York, the Panamanian junta officially cables Washington and appoints Philippe Bunau-Varilla as the envoy extraordinary and minister plenipotentiary of the Republic of Panama to the United States.
Okay, we need to define exactly what that legal title means because it is the linchpin of the disaster that follows. Minister plenipotentiary. It derives from Latin, right? Plenus meaning full, and potens meaning power.
Full power.
Right. It is a diplomatic rank that grants the individual the absolute unchecked legal authority to negotiate and sign a treaty on behalf of their government. They do not need to send the drafts back to their home country for review or approval. Their signature legally binds the nation.
And Bunau-Varilla leverages that full power instantly. He knows he has a tiny, fragile window of time to secure his $40 million.
So he sits down with U.S. Secretary of State John Hay to draft the Canal Treaty.
And Bunau-Varilla's strategy is ruthlessly pragmatic. He must draft a document so overwhelmingly favorable to the United States that the U.S. Senate will ratify it immediately, without the delays that destroyed the Colombian Treaty.
He practically gives away the store? Actually, no, he gives away someone else's store entirely.
He drafts the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty. And we really must look at the specific language used in this document because it dictated the reality of millions of lives. Under the previous treaty, Colombia offered a 6-mile-wide zone on a 100-year lease. Bunau-Varilla expands this. He grants the United States a 10-mile-wide canal zone.
But it's not just the size of the land, is it? It's the jurisdictional control. Article 3 of the treaty contains probably the most consequential phrase in Panamanian history.
Yeah, Article 3 states that the Republic of Panama grants to the United States all the rights, power, and authority within the zone which the United States would possess and exercise if it were the sovereign of the territory.
As if it were the sovereign. He essentially signs away the jurisdictional independence of a 10-mile-wide strip cutting directly through the center of the country. The U.S. gets its own police force, its own courts, its own laws, right in the middle of Panama.
And he didn't just grant it for a century, he granted this control in perpetuity.
In perpetuity, forever. A permanent bisection of a nation that was only 2 weeks old. And in exchange, Panama receives the exact same financial terms. Colombia rejected $10 million up front and a $250,000 annuity that wouldn't even begin paying out until 1913.
And crucially, the treaty guarantees the legal right of the French Compagnie Nouvelle to sell its properties and concessions to the United States.
Yeah.
Bunau-Varilla secures his $40 million.
The timeline of the signing is just a devastating blow. The Panamanian junta, realizing that a Frenchman is negotiating their sovereign rights, dispatches a delegation of actual Panamanian citizens. This includes Manuel Amador and Federico Boyd. They travel to Washington to negotiate the treaty themselves.
Because they want to protect their new nation.
Naturally. So they take a ship to New York and board a steam train heading south to the capital.
But Bunau-Varilla tracks their progress. He knows they are coming, and he knows they will never agree to the draconian terms he has drafted. So, on the evening of November 18, 1903, as the Panamanian delegation's train is racing down the eastern seaboard, Bunau-Varilla rushes to the private home of Secretary of State John Hay.
Wait, they don't even do it at the State Department.
No, they do it in Hay's house. They sign the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty at 6:40 p.m., and the Panamanian delegation's train pulls into Union Station in Washington, D.C., exactly 2 hours later.
They arrive 2 hours late. Not a single Panamanian citizen was in the room when the founding document of their country's future was executed. The geographical heart of their nation was signed away in perpetuity by a man who hadn't breathed Panamanian air in 17 years.
And when Amador and Boyd read the text of the treaty the next morning, they are horrified. The terms are an astonishing violation of the sovereignty they just risked their lives to achieve.
Did they try to stop it?
They did. They plead with Bunau-Varilla to reopen negotiations. They argue that the Panamanian junta will never accept this.
And this is where Bunau-Varilla transitions from a shadow broker to an outright extortionist. He resorts to explicit blackmail.
He sends a chilling cable to the junta in Panama. He informs them that if they refuse to ratify the treaty exactly as written, if they dare to change a single comma or reopen negotiations, the United States will view it as a hostile act.
Oh my God.
He warns them that the U.S. will withdraw the warships from the coast, dissolve the defensive shield, and allow the Colombian army to march back across the isthmus.
So imagine being the listener in this situation. You just won your independence, you arrive in Washington to sign your founding document, and a guy who hasn't been to your country in 17 years hands you a pen and says, "I gave away the middle of your country forever. Sign it, or the Colombian army comes back." What a devastating ultimatum.
He effectively holds a gun to the head of the new republic. He tells them, sign this document permanently dividing your country, or the Americans go home, and you will all be hanged in a Colombian plaza for high treason.
And what do?
Faced with the immediate existential threat of military annihilation, the Panamanian junta is trapped. In December of 1903, they ratify the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty without changing a single word.
Because of these incredibly murky, coercive origins, historians have been arguing about what exactly happened in 1903 for over a century.
Yes, the coercive mechanics of this birth have generated a massive, vigorous historiographical debate. For over a century, historians have intensely argued over how to classify the events of 1903.
And because this history is so highly charged and touches on deep national sensitivities, it is crucial that we impartially lay out the two competing scholarly viewpoints.
Exactly. We must examine the evidence for both arguments exactly as they are debated in academic circles today, without taking a side ourselves.
Right. So we have to look at the genuine independence case, and we have to weigh it against the U.S. engineered secession case. Let's start with the first one.
Okay, let's examine the genuine independence perspective first. Historians advocating this view emphasize that the 1903 revolution was not a sudden anomaly manufactured in a vacuum. It was the culmination of a real, century-old separatist tradition.
Because Panama always felt a bit disconnected from Colombia, right?
Exactly. Panama had a distinct geographic and cultural identity from the Andean center of Colombia. Throughout the 19th century, Panamanians engaged in multiple armed revolts to separate from Bogotá, most notably in 1830-1840, and during the establishment of the brief sovereign state of Panama in 1855.
So the argument here is that the desire for self-determination was deeply authentic. The isthmus suffered from extreme neglect. The government in Bogotá repeatedly utilized Panama as an economic resource, siphoning off transit revenues without really investing in local infrastructure.
And the catastrophic Thousand Days' War had physically devastated the Panamanian countryside.
So from this viewpoint, leaders like Amador Guerrero were authentic patriots. They desperately wanted freedom, and they pragmatically utilized American military power as a necessary tool to finally achieve a legitimate, long-held national aspiration. The desire was real, even if the geopolitical leverage required foreign assistance.
That's the core of that argument. Now, conversely, the U.S. engineered secession perspective focuses heavily on the mechanics of the event. Historians in this camp argue that intention is irrelevant without capability.
What do they point to as evidence?
They point to the undeniable fact that the November 3rd revolt absolutely would have failed and likely would have been crushed within hours by the Theodore's battalion without the physical blockade enforced by the USS Nashville.
The scholarly side argues that you cannot separate the birth of the nation from the financial and diplomatic strings attached to it. A genuine grassroots independence movement is not bankrolled by a foreign corporate agent in a New York hotel, right?
Exactly. And the resulting sovereign treaty is not drafted, signed, and imposed by external powers who actively exclude the citizens of the new nation from the negotiating room. Therefore, they classify 1903 not as an independence movement, but as a secession entirely engineered by Washington to facilitate an imperial land grab.
It's a really compelling counterargument.
This raises an important question regarding historical synthesis. Must history be binary? Must it be exclusively one or the other?
Probably not.
Right. The prevailing synthesis among many modern historians is that both realities simultaneously coexist. The deep-seated, authentic Panamanian desire for separation was genuine. But that organic desire was captured, strategically utilized, and ultimately boxed in by the overwhelming force of American imperial ambitions and French financial desperation.
I really want you to think about how you define independence in the context of global power. If a marginalized group authentically wants to be free, but their success absolutely relies on the military muscle and the self-serving financing of a foreign empire, does that reliance invalidate their authentic desire?
That's the million-dollar question.
Does the fact that they were manipulated by Bunau-Varilla mean their independence wasn't real? Or is the birth of a nation always messy, always reliant on brutal compromises with stronger powers? It's a heavy question.
It is a profoundly heavy question, and it is a reality that the Panamanian people had to navigate every single day for the rest of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Because the imposed reality of the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty did not stay confined to 1903.
No, the ink on that document fueled 70 years of intense geopolitical friction.
Now, Theodore Roosevelt certainly never lost any sleep over the ethical nuances of his actions. In his view, he advanced the cause of global civilization by securing the canal.
He's pretty proud of it,
Oh, incredibly proud.
Mm.
In 1911, he delivered a speech at the University of California, Berkeley, and he brazenly addressed the controversy. He didn't offer a legal defense, he offered an imperial boast. He stated, "I took the isthmus, started the canal, and then left Congress, not to debate the canal, but to debate me."
I took the isthmus. Wow.
That phrase, combined with the catastrophic legal wording of "in perpetuity," became the festering wound of U.S.-Panama relations. For decades, Panamanians had to live alongside a wealthy, foreign-controlled, highly segregated zone that literally cut their homeland in two.
It generated deep resentment.
It did, and that resentment periodically exploded into violence, most notably during the tragic Martyrs' Day riots in 1964, where Panamanian students were killed over the right to fly their national flag inside the Canal Zone.
And the pressure mounted for decades until it culminated in the grueling, highly contentious political fight over the Torrijos-Carter treaties in the late 1970s. Those treaties finally sought to abrogate the 1903 treaty and return the canal to Panamanian sovereignty.
And during the intense U.S. domestic debate over whether to ratify the new treaties and return the canal, the ghost of 1903 resurfaced in a highly revealing way.
Oh, this is the Hayakawa quote, right.
Yes. In 1976, a conservative U.S. Senate candidate from California named S.I. Hayakawa distilled the entire grim century-long history into a single, infamous quip. Defending American control of the canal, he joked, "We should keep the Panama Canal. After all, we stole it fair and square."
It's an astonishing quote because it says the quiet part entirely out loud.
It perfectly captures the paradox of the American position. It was an open, almost cheerful acknowledgement of the imperial coercion that birthed the canal, while simultaneously reflecting the modern realization that the 1903 legal arrangement was fundamentally unsustainable and generationally damaging.
And there's an ironic ending to that, isn't there?
Yes, in a fitting twist of historical irony, when Hayakawa eventually reached the Senate and faced the actual vote in 1978, he voted yes to ratify the Torrijos-Carter treaties. He ultimately voted to return the territory his predecessor had taken.
So what does this all mean for us today? If we look back at the scope of this historical thriller, the physical canal that was eventually blasted through the jungle was an undeniable marvel of human engineering. It connected the oceans and restructured global trade.
But the treaty that allowed the dynamite to be planted created a deep, festering divide right through the political and social heart of a nation.
Exactly. It took nearly a century of diplomacy and protest to heal the wound opened in a matter of weeks in 1903.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a stark reminder that international law is incredibly malleable, and that documents signed in quiet, luxurious rooms have loud, echoing generational consequences for the people living on the actual terrain.
When you look at the news today and you hear analysts discussing strategic buffer zones or bilateral treaties or transit guarantees, remember the Waldorf-Astoria. Remember that international borders are frequently just the codified result of who held the most leverage and the biggest warships on a random Tuesday in history.
And remember that often, the people whose lives, whose identities, and whose futures are most impacted by a piece of paper are the ones deliberately locked out of the room when it's signed. Before we close, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought regarding the sheer fragile mechanics of time.
Okay, lay it on us.
Consider the steam train carrying Manuel Amador Guerrero and Frederica Boyd from New York to Washington, D.C. on the evening of November 18, 1903. They missed defending their country's sovereignty by exactly 2 hours.
120 minutes.
Ask yourself, what if the train had been just a little bit faster? What if a sudden rainstorm had delayed Philippe Bunau-Varilla's carriage on his way to John Hay's residence? If the actual Panamanian delegation had walked into that room before the ink was dry, would they have possessed the diplomatic fortitude to refuse the in perpetuity clause?
That's a fascinating what if.
Would they have successfully called Bunau-Varilla's bluff about the U.S. warships?
Oh.
Could a simple, mundane 2-hour delay in transit have single-handedly rewritten the entire geopolitical history of the 20th century Americas?
It makes you wonder how much of our solid, unchangeable reality was actually built on the razor-thin margin of a delayed train schedule, a manipulated postage stamp, and a check casually written in a hotel suite. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the architecture of the maps, keep looking for who wasn't allowed in the room, and keep exploring the history behind the headlines.